Welcome to the weekly podcast, which looks at every aspect of something which has or will at some point affect us all. And that is grief. Whether you've lost a loved one or are about to lose someone you love, or perhaps you're simply trying to support someone navigate their grief and don't know where to start or what to say, then perhaps this is the podcast for you. I'm Venetia Quick, and each week I'll be bringing you different stories and experiences of loss, love, hope, and at times humour. So this week I'm joined by producer, broadcaster, writer, mum. Anything else?
I don't know. It's a real jack of all trades.
Well,
it's a classic Irish media thing.
Multitasking.
What do you do? I don't know.
Maia Dunphy, you're very welcome to this series, and we're going to talk about your mum, Helen, because you've talked a lot about her and a lot about her passing in the past couple of years, which I think is coming up to 3 years now.
3 years, this year.
Which is it's still very new.
It is. And it's funny how people said to me, oh God, you've shared an awful lot, and as if it was somehow intentional. And to be honest, and I know everybody's grief is, your bereavement is very different, being your husband and father to your kids, and a mother is different, and it's a natural order of things for a parent to die before their children, obviously, but at a certain point and all that. But I hadn't processed any of that. I was just desperately sad. And the thing is, Venetia, it ties into other parts of my life that have been quite difficult. And someone said to me, God, you're awfully miserable. I went, oh, sorry about that. Here's a Christmas cracker joke for you.
Yeah.
And I went, oh, no, I don't want to be miserable. But sometimes I have to say, the gratitude phenomenon or movement is a very helpful one. But I think it's also really important to say, do you know what, things are actually just a bit shit at the moment. Can I say shit in this podcast?
Yes, you can. You can say
I think it's important for people to say, actually, things are really hard. And today, I actually really don't feel that positive about anything. Tomorrow, I might.
Yeah.
And I think that's quite helpful. So when my marriage ended about 5-6 years ago now, and I came from London back to Dublin with a very young child, my parents sort of became my family unit again. And that's quite unusual, because I see my friends now and they have their own family units, and parents are aging and I see them at Christmas or weekends.
Sunday.
But I started going on holiday with my parents again, and my mum was not sick. She was vibrant, healthy. She was a very hands-on granny. My son was her only grandchild, so he could do no wrong, and she just loved it.
And during COVID as well, I think I read that you formed a family bubble with your parents.
Yeah.
Whereas that didn't really happen that much because of the sort of, obviously, the age demographic with people who are more susceptible and people with young kids not wanting to be near feeling they couldn't go near their parents. So did that become a whole new different family dynamic then? Because obviously you were an adult. Yeah,
and that's what I feel like I need to sort of explain to people, because sometimes, I'm not saying that the loss of my mum was greater than the loss of anyone else's mum, but I was just trying to explain to people how I don't know how big a loss it felt to me, because we were in this little family unit. And when COVID hit, God, that was such a strange time. And for the first 6 weeks, I was about 6k away from them, and we all, we were quite militant about the 2k rule initially, and I was lucky the sea was near me. But then I remember after about 6 weeks getting the train out to them and standing at their gate, and I don't have a big driveway, it's a few feet, and ringing the doorbell and standing there, and then wiping the doorbell down with an antiseptic wipe and waving. And then when the bubble thing came in, I realised, hang on, Tom's creche was closed, I wasn't working, there was my parents and my mum and dad and my brother lived in one house. My brother lived with them and I was with Tom, and none of us were seeing anybody else. So we formed a bubble then. So, they really were my family unit. And my mum looked after my son Tom when I worked, and we went on holiday together. And it was the first year that our marriage ended. I said to him, God, summers, as a single parent, summers can be very lonely and very isolating. And if you can afford the 2-week holiday, sometimes it only highlights what you don't have. And there's other families bickering over ice cream. So my son and I started doing lots of little mini breaks when we could afford them around the year. And I found that easier. Then my mum said, why don't we just plan, before he was in school, plan a September holiday to Spain? And I was like, I can't do that. I'm a grown up. And then I realised I can do whatever suits my family unit. And now I see it with people, they call it 3G holidays, 3 generation. People, especially post-COVID, people are bringing grandparents away, let's face it, for babysitting sometimes. Or to pick up some of the bill sometimes. But also because a lot of time has been lost, I feel.
Yeah.
So when my mum got sick and it was pancreatic cancer, we were still very hopeful. I know your dad went through this as well.
Actually, that's the ironic thing, isn't it? Because I think it was December 3 years ago, because your mum passed away in the February, my dad passed away in the March, and we bumped into each other Do you remember over the Christmas period? While
Outside a
everyone
pub.
yeah, well, nothing wrong with that. It's Christmas. But do you remember everyone's sort of talking Christmas pints and what they're doing, whatever. And you and I were just like talking about whipples.
I know.
Which a lot of people don't know about.
I remember that very clearly because it was my only Christmas night out. Because again, with young kids and single parenting, and also like I had 20 years ago and I don't really miss it, but I was going out with a couple of friends to a pub near where both of us actually live, and we were bringing our kids at 6 o'clock to get a pizza and a pint for us, not the kids. And I met you, and I was still a bit, my mum had the Whipple procedure, which is a major surgery that they do for pancreatic cancer patients who they deem suitable. It's very, as your dad had it too, it's very
it's 12
invasive.
hours.
It's very
I think
invasive.
his was 12 hours.
Yeah. So we were really hopeful because they only do that if you have a good chance of being in the very low percentage, unfortunately, of people who survive. But she was sicker and sicker and sicker. But that Christmas, she's like, no, go out with your friends. And I was hosting Christmas that year, and we just thought it was post-surgery recovery. But then in the January after, so that was January 22, 3 years ago now, then she just went back in and the cancer had spread everywhere, and then she was gone 5 weeks later.
Which is very, very soon afterwards. The whole Whipple's procedure as well, just for anyone who doesn't know, like it's a 50-50 operation. Like I know we were told if my dad didn't have it, perhaps 6 weeks.
Yeah.
If he did have it, he could have a lot longer, but it was 50-50.
Yeah, but also most people aren't even eligible for it in the first place.
That's how invasive it is, because afterwards you're type 1, they take out your spleen, they take out part of your stomach. It's like a
replumbing.
They
essentially take out. My mum said, because my mum like me, we love information. We were looking it up, and she went, Jesus Christ. I said, they take out a lot of your insides and then they replumb the rest back up. And my mum, it's funny, the things that we worry about now, I would do anything to have her here. I'd cook her whatever food she needed. My mum loved food. I love food. And she said, oh my God, I won't be able to eat this. I said, look, let's get the surgery over with, and then we'll work about what we can and can't eat. And now, it's funny, if she was still here, like I said, I'd be cooking whatever she needed to eat. But it's, my mum never ever talked about death. I don't know about how your dad was, but
no, he didn't.
I mean never, never ever. I remember when I was 17, I got a donor card from the pharmacy. It's like, I want a donor card, and you had to have it signed by a parent. So I'm not going to sign that, and I'm not going to talk about it. Even at that young age, like, she wouldn't talk about it. And then about 10 years ago, long before anybody was ever ill, I made some, it wasn't a flippant comment. I said, look, just so anyone, if I get hit by a bus tomorrow,
use a good photo in the paper.
I didn't think about that.
No, that's very important. Very important.
I said, I don't want to be buried, I want to be cremated. So she said, I don't want to have this conversation. Like, she was very, I don't know, my mum didn't have a strong faith. I think she had a lot of living left to do. And my fear is that death scared her. And I think the worst of all human emotions is fear. And I wouldn't have liked her to be fearful. And I'm afraid that she might have been. So I think I wrote a piece for the newspaper after she died about it, and I say loads of people, 2 people got in touch with me to say it meant a lot to them, because I wrote a piece saying how much guilt I felt about the conversations that I felt that I should have had with her before she died. But in actual fact, you have to take the lead from the person who's leaving. And she was the one who was leaving, and every day in the hospital I said to her, is there anything else, Mum, you want to talk about? Anything on your mind? Anything worried? And she went, absolutely not. I'm going to get better. I'm going to get out of here. So I think what she needed was for me to believe that. Yeah.
And that would reinforce her feeling that she was. Do you think?
Yeah, I think it made her feel safer. Like I said, I just didn't want her to feel afraid. And I don't think, and I'm an ambassador for the hospice, and there was an amazing man called Andy who I met at the hospice coffee morning last September. And he was a patient service user in the hospice. And I'd said to him, look, I'd love to come back and see you again. He went, look, he said, well, don't leave it too long, because I don't think I have very long. And I went back in the next day to see him. And he actually died the day after that. And the last day I spent about half an hour with him, and I said to his son and daughter, you go and get a sandwich or a cup of tea and I'll sit with your dad. And he was just, it was a very selfishly, it was an amazing experience for me to sit and talk to somebody almost the way I wish I'd spoken to my mum. And I ended up going to his funeral in floods of tears, like I'd known this man all my life. I knew him for 2 days. But I realised then that was his way of dealing with. He wanted to talk about, and he said to me, and I hope it's okay, his kids don't mind me sharing this, he said, he said, I'm not scared, so I'm a bit sad, because I felt like I should have had more time. And it was a very powerful thing for him to say to me, and I really appreciated it. And I just don't think you can push people to have those conversations.
Yeah, I think it's very much, and it is sort of a conversation that people don't like to have.
No.
And they don't like to, and also because, you know, if you bring up a parent, for example, brings up wills or something like that, that can lead to arguments.
Yeah.
That can lead to sort of this big family sort of like, well, I want the house. Well, why shouldn't you get the house? Well, you don't live here. I do. Do you know what I mean? That sort of whole thing, which nobody wants. And it's also sort of, I think there's something a lot of people feel is crass talking about wills and death, and it's almost like you're wishing the other person's life away,
Yeah, see,
or
I'm
that
a
you
very
accept it before it's
practical
even
person.
happened.
Yeah, and my dad is a hugely practical person. And my mum was, I mean, I would have described her as being practical, but she wasn't pragmatic in that way. And I think what was important to her was her family, and she just loved life. And you know, only now, like nearly 3 years on, I can talk about it without crying. I mean, I really did. I was so affected by it, still so affected by it. And the first few months after she died, I was completely numb. Now, having a young child is a great thing, because, you know, she died on a Sunday lunchtime. The next morning, I had to get Tom to school.
Yeah.
I was like,
There's no choice.
No, I know,
Yeah.
and it's. But yeah, it's taken me a while to come to terms with the things that I feel weren't said. And then you have to realise, when it's a parent or anybody who you're close to, that actually the last few weeks, most things have been said before then. You know, my mum knew how much she was loved. I knew how much I was loved. And the kind of idea of a Hallmark movie deathbed scene where you hold someone's hand and thank them for everything, I don't think that really happens very often. But I think it's really important that people know. And sometimes
That's actually a very good point, is that you remember back to all of the things that they have been said.
Exactly.
Whether it's just randomly after you've been out your months for Sunday lunch or whatever, and you just go, oh, thanks a million. Do you know what I mean?
Exactly. The good is implied. The good is implied, and the love is implied, and it always is. And sometimes, and I've seen it with people, and I did it myself, your brain, I guess, you know, your brain is, you're bereaved, you're sad, you default to guilt. So sometimes you think about all of the bad things you ever did, even going back years, or sometime when you were snappy or you couldn't take a phone because you said, oh, sorry, Mom, I'll call you later, and you hang up and you go, oh my God, my tone was. But they are few and far between, and the good always outweighs the bad. I think that's what I do now. And sometimes I look back over her texts, and they're usually, my mum would send capital letters, and they go, new hair dye, it's better for your skin. Just you go, okay, what? And there's no link. And
so
you go,
shouty texts.
Yeah. But then I'd see the ones where I'd say, thanks for having Tom, Mum, you're the best, don't know what I'd do without you. And she'd go, look, it's an absolute pleasure. And those little interactions that let her know, you know, so I think.
Yeah, I think, you know, just talking about that is really important, because there is, we do a thing, and I know I did it after Martin died, where there was this guilt of, you know, we'd a row about the dishwasher the morning he died. Do you know what I mean? Like, and I was like, oh, do we have that? Didn't really matter, or, you know, that sort of thing. Or maybe I should have done more. Maybe I should have done this, or maybe I shouldn't have worked as much, or, you know, but you forget, well, actually the night before we had the best crack watching Winning Streak, you know, which we actually did. And sort of,
is there a couple on earth who doesn't row regularly about the dishwasher?
I don't know. It's sort of,
that
it
was
is a thing.
In my
the dishwasher
marriage.
is a
what
thing.
What are you doing? I'm restacking it. Jesus Christ. Oh God.
Yeah, but it is. It's, you know,
but
it's supposed to be a help.
That's the normal stuff that makes life real. And I always think, you have to think, if roles were reversed, you wouldn't want Martin thinking that. You go, that's totally irrelevant. In the big tapestry of our life together, the rows were what made the good stuff even better, you know. And people who say they don't row either really don't.
Well,
they're lying.
Tell me about sort of, you know, you're talking about sort of holidays, and now that you can get through talking about your mum without crying, are there times where you find you expect to be triggered, but you're not, but something else triggers you?
Oh God, all the time. Like the big ones, for me, having lost my mum, the big ones are Mother's Day, her birthday, Christmas. And they're often the ones that you're so braced for them that they pass by.
And it doesn't happen.
No, I know. And on her birthday, I don't know why I was going to light a candle in a church. She never set foot in a church. But for some reason, it's nice to take a minute.
Which is unusual, because she's Spanish. And normally, you know, with Spain and Spanish people, you think, you know, the Catholic faith, and
her family was very complicated. We're finding out more and more and more. I am now. So my grandfather was a Portuguese Jewish. My granny was Spanish Catholic. It turns out they were never married. And it makes a lot of sense. My granny was very angry and resentful about lots of things in her life. And it makes sense now because, of course, I mean, he was from quite a strict Jewish family, so she would have had to have converted and she didn't. And anyway, she always just said, no, we were told that he left. And he'd basically abandoned them. And it turns out they were never married in the first place. So she married an English man about 8 years after my mum was born. And I found the marriage cert. And she's down as Conchita Barranco Domingue spinster. And she would have been down as a divorcee. So it was all there. It was so simple. We never even looked at it. So I think my granny was very... I think her family is very complicated, and then she found life very hard. And my granny she lived in London and worked as a waitress, never spoke great English even. And her religion was just work. And you have to look after yourself because no one else is going to look after you.
So that's where your mum got her.
My mum was much warmer. My granny was not. I think my granny this is a whole other podcast. My granny was just not a very happy person, and she had a very, very, very hard life. But my mum was raised by her aunt who'd married an English man who was a lovely man, and so my mum was really raised in Weston-super-Mare in England. So she's raised with two cousins who were, like, I call them my uncles now.
Wow. Who
are both in Spain now. They live in Spain. And so it complicated. My mum, because I remember saying to her, do you not want to know more about like your father? And apparently she has 2 half-brothers in Lisbon. And she went, no, I really don't. My mum was so happy with where the grass was never greener. And, she was, and even, my mum... She was never out of place. Like my mum, mum was a stay-at-home mum. But I remember being at an event and introducing her to the then Minister for Justice, Francis Fitzgerald. They had a great conversation, and then she spent the next time talking to the waiter about cava. I mean, she could find a level with everybody, and she never felt that she couldn't hold her own. She was just great. And like I said, the grass was never greener with my mum. And wherever, my dad and her travelled a bit, and basically where we were was her home, and she wasn't ever looking for any kind of resolution or family history or answers to things. She's like, no, shit, that's just the way it is.
And do you think that came from her background and her upbringing, that in her mind, because I was reading somewhere where, she'd have the uniforms and the radiators when it was cold, and I was actually thinking about that this morning.
She just created she was just a perfect. She wanted to create a home and a family. Home. I don't think she ever really. Her aunt and uncle. Her aunt was my great aunt was a bit of a battle axe, but very shouty Spanish woman. I remember one Christmas she came and there was a 3-hour slanging match over a lost tweezers between her and my grandmother. It was just all. There was almost like stabbings over.
You could go to the chemist and buy a new one.
Spanish people, I can say it because I'm technically half Spanish.
Yeah,
they can be very aggressive, and I think that especially in southern Spain as well, they have a very dark history, and they've a lot of baggage. And when you think about, like, Franco only died in 1975. Again, this is a whole other podcast, but there's this kind of darkness to them, and certainly in my granny's family, the ones that I've met, like, oh my God. So you talk about rowing over wills and things. They're rowing over tiny houses and tiny bits of land, and my mum just wanted no part of it. Yeah. So that was.
So in one way, she became more Irish than
Spanish.
Where did she and your dad meet? Because they were married in Paris. 50 years.
Yeah.
Wow.
Their 50th anniversary was the day after my mum's funeral.
Wow.
Yeah. So we opened champagne, and I cooked a substandard meal that my mum would have done better, and it was. It was. So they met in Paris. My mum was working as an au pair in Paris, and my dad had got a job. My dad was from New Ross, and he really just wanted to get out of Ireland, and he had the choice of 2 jobs, one with Dunnes Stores, one with IBM in his 20s, and he even though Dunnes Stores was a more secure job, he said there'd be a chance of travel, and took a job with IBM and got a job as an international auditor, and was gone at 26, and he was around kind of, he was all around the Middle East and Beirut, and he was based in Paris and then all around Europe. I mean, for a guy from New Ross suddenly in the 60s to be in Amsterdam, Paris, Beirut.
Yeah, it was sort of unheard of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But so they met there. My mum was very exotic, and then she moved till she was in London then, so they had a long distance romance for a while, and then they got married in London. And I said, Mum, I got married in London because you didn't have divorce in Ireland, just in case. And I went, oh right, hedge your bets there. My dad said, what? I don't think he knew that.
So she was quite ahead of her time.
Yeah, she was.
In that way,
she was. But there was a lot of the Irish mammy to her. There's no doubt about that.
How do you think now, because obviously, Tom, your son Tom, because your dad's Tom as well, was a huge part of your new I suppose, your renaissance with your family and your parents, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Like, it was a sort of a different dynamic. How did their relationship sort of perhaps change how you are as a mother? How did your mum and Tom's relationship?
I completely underestimated the power of a grandchild. And that might sound very naive, but people always say to me, you never wanted kids. I did not want kids, but I made documentaries years ago, and some of them about fertility, about the decision to have kids, the pressure on women to have kids. And it wasn't that I actively didn't want kids. I like you, I was very busy. I was married, but then long distance marriage, and it was never a priority. But I have a brother and a sister, and neither of them have children. And when I got pregnant with Tom, I was actually a little bit upset. I was 39 years old, and I was thinking, oh my God, this is going to change. Now, it was planned, but Mum said, when you told us, we thought we were going to say you were really ill, because you said, I have some news. And I was like, this is really good news. And it completely changed the dynamic of my family. And seeing my parents, my mum always wanted to be a granny, but she had the courtesy to not keep bringing it up because, it's not always by choice. But it completely changed the dynamic. And my dad as well is, a revelation. My dad was he was a brilliant father, but he was always very busy. And he said, the time I spend with Tom now, he said, I just feel guilty about the things I didn't do with you. I said, but Dad, you were out working all the time. He was a brilliant father, but himself, and since my mum died as well, Tom and my dad have spent a lot of time. They build Lego, they have Lego projects together, they go walking together. And my mum had 6 years of being a granny, and every time I feel sad about Tom's milestones now and what she's missing out on, I think, but thank God she had those 6 years, because I have a couple of very good friends who lost parents both to cancer as well, younger than my mum, and had their first babies after that. And it's a source of such sadness to them that their parents didn't get to meet their kids. So I think now they find comfort in different ways, but sometimes you have to find the comfort where you can. And I take great comfort in the fact that she got to be, she just adored him. And all these things, like my parents are in a golf club. Yeah, insert joke here. But there was a family day every December where you'd bring your grandkids in to see Santa. And I knew my mum she'd go and do the decorations for it, but never got to bring a grandkid there. And
so that was a huge highlight.
So Tom would have been 4 or 5, and she'd, can I bring him to the Santa day in the club? I said, of course you can. And the Santa hats came out and the jumpers, and she came back and she went, God, it was very disappointing. Santa was rubbish. Santa was rubbish. I said, okay, well look, at least now you know.
Yeah, and you got to bring him.
Exactly.
Yeah. Do you ever find though that, obviously Tom hits, as you were saying, different milestones, and he does different things, and he's in school and bits and bobs. Do you ever go to pick up the phone?
Yeah, I do. And the sad thing is, over the last 6 months, I've stopped doing that. My brain has stopped defaulting to it. But I did an awful lot. I had Tom and I are particularly close, and I think also starting school during COVID was very hard for them, so they didn't even finish. He wasn't in creche very long, to be honest, because I kept him with me all the time. He started school at the time we had to leave them at the gate with a mask on, and there were no play dates, and it was so basically Tom had the first 3 years in school, he really struggled going in. He just didn't want to go in, and every day when I left, 9:15, my phone would ring. Mum would go, how is he today? How's my little man today? Is he okay? And and it was lovely to know, and especially again as a single parent, to have someone else who, because friends kind of go, we've heard it before, we're kind of bored. Yeah. But my mum really cared. She really cared about how he was and how I was. And I think that's sometimes, and a friend of mine said to me recently who lost her dad, she said, sometimes when you lose your parents and if you don't have a partner, she said, you feel like you're not anybody's number one anymore. Which was a really sad thing to say. But I knew what she meant, because to know that somebody always has your back. Now,
no matter what.
We all have good friends, but they have different priorities too. But there's something about, I'm a mum now too, and Tom will, I will always have Tom's back no matter what. And there was, I know not everyone's that close to their parents either, but that was a big loss to me.
Well, I suppose your parents are supposed to love you unconditionally.
Yeah, and they have to, don't they? It's in the contract.
Yeah. It's the unpaid job. But I wonder, is there's always that sort of, they're there and you can do whatever you want and they're always going to be there. Yeah. And I see that sometimes with my own kids, is that sort of like, oh yeah, but Mum will be there. Grand, especially with one, it'll be grand.
It's lovely. And I remember saying it in her eulogy. that actually, because sometimes you go, oh my God, I took all this for granted. But I think the sign of a very happy childhood and great parents is taking things for granted, assuming that there will be food on the table, that, you know, things will be nice. Isn't that a lovely way for your kids to think, that they go, yeah, I sometimes snuck in at 4 a.m, not Tommy's only 9, but, you know, the things I did, and I just assumed that everything would always be okay, because that's what parents really should do.
Yeah. Do you think as well it has questioned, I suppose, your own mortality? Because I think when you're a single parent and then your parent passes away, it used to be grandparent, parent, you, but now you're sort of,
I know,
by law of the way things should work, you're next.
We're becoming that generation. I say
Yeah.
you're with me in this in this cohort. Quick, come
Yeah.
on, you are. It's weird though, and I see
is
it now
really
that
weird.
people talk about the sandwich generation, and especially like you had kids younger than me, but like I had Tom at 39, you know, which is older to have kids, and I keep working out because Tom goes, you know, when I'm 40 and I go, stop, let's just stop doing the maths there.
Casper, when I was 39, I was called a geriatric parent.
Do you know, I was never. That term was never used for me.
They
Thankfully,
were too scared of you.
Yeah,
Yeah. They weren't obviously scared. Yeah, it's a weird one though.
Yeah.
The whole, you know.
Now I'll be honest. It's about a year after my mum died. I've actually never said this out loud. I developed a few months of really bad health anxiety. And I think a lot of and it wasn't totally imaginary. I had really bad back pain, really bad pelvic pain. I was tired all the time. I think it was all hormonal, like perimenopausal stuff. But I remember, and I've never had any kind of chronic pain. And I remember thinking, and I booked in for colonoscopies and MRIs and spent quite a bit of money on it.
You do become quite neurotic, without saying you were neurotic,
but
you do become neurotic.
It's
about your
neurotic,
health.
but I don't think it's irrational.
No.
And I had another friend who died very suddenly. I won't give details, not my place to, and left behind 3 kids. And, you know, when she died, it was a shock to all of us because it happened so quickly. And, you know, her symptoms were dismissed as something else. And, you know, and I was like, I had so much pain for so long that I was thinking, this can't be normal. And I'm a bad sleeper anyway, but it was horrible. And I remember being kind of obsessed going, if something happens to me, what's going to happen to Tom?
Yeah.
And that's very dark, but it's,
Yeah. But I think also looking back on, I suppose, for me, both Martin and my dad, I got like that after both of them, but I actually wonder, was it all sort of, when somebody's sick, you know, you keep going and you just keep going and you don't stop. And if you have a headache, you ignore it. If you've your legs falling off, you ignore that as well.
Yeah.
And you just keep going, and going into hospital becomes an everyday part of life, and it's just something you do and you factor it in or whatever. And then it all stops and it's gone. And it's sort of like, I suppose you then get the sort of, not necessarily the time, especially if you're kids, you're working or whatever, but you get that moment to go, oh, I have a pain in my elbow. Oh my God, what is that pain in the elbow? And you're almost sort of, I found because somebody had died, that, oh my God, I could actually die. It's real. I could die.
Yeah.
It's not just something that happens to somebody else.
And it's not actually irrational, because sometimes bad things do happen, and 99% of the time. And I've done some work with the new Pancreatic Cancer Ireland charity. It's all about awareness, but I think the key is also to not scaremonger, because, you know, the majority of the time, pains are just pains, or they're hormonal, or they're muscular, or whatever. But when a series of bad things happens, and you went through it and I went through it, my mum and some friends as well, you know, you sit there at 4 a.m. and you think, you know, sometimes bad things do happen, and in a way it's good to take control of your health, and especially if you're a single parent, you know, you're responsible for younger people, and you do need to be responsible for your own health as well. But there is, when you mentioned that the hospital treadmill when someone is sick, and I've never really said that to us before. It's so jarring when it's suddenly over. You get into this conveyor belt of like school drop off, straight to the hospital, back, sort food, the next day the same, try and work in between, and then when it stops, it's just
that's almost like a bereavement in itself, because even though you don't want to be there, like I'm just remember walking down the actually in Vincent's as well, walking down the corridor for the 10 days my dad was really sick, and that was when we knew the time was coming after sort of years after his whipples of being in and out of hospital and being sick or whatever. This was it. We knew this was the time because he was always like Lazarus. Do you know what I mean? He went into hospital.
Your dad is amazing.
He went in aged 80 to hospital during COVID. Got COVID in hospital. And at that time, nobody was allowed near anything. And I was like, I'll do whatever tests. I was ringing up doctors I knew, anybody that you sort of know to sort of see, can you get me in? Can you get me in? And it was, you know, the whole thing.
Venetia in a laundry bin.
That's what I was really at. I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll jump into the back. And you create all these situations, which was quite funny. But I remember the hospital saying, and which they did with many people at the time, was if we have to move to ICU, we need your permission now, and if we get to that point, you'll be allowed in, etc. So of course he got COVID in hospital, 80, whatever, and we were just like, look, chances now are this is how it's gonna end. But no, sort of course, rallied and then was, you know, fine. But you do then go, when you are allowed into the hospital and you're in the whole time, it's just, as much as you hate it, it's like this weird, well, what do I do?
Yeah.
When it's gone.
There's a visceral pull to it. There's almost a sense of comfort, because also you know that they are somewhere where they are, well, ostensibly should be safe, but they, you know, you're leaving. I don't know. Unless someone's been through it, it's very hard to explain. And I would happily have. I was, it was 5 weeks for my mum, and it's quite a long time, 5 weeks.
Yeah,
every day. And like there were a couple of days I didn't go in because of work things that I just simply had to do. And she would have, she knew that my mum was compos mentis right till the very second she died. She knew exactly what was going on, but. Yeah, I mean, not that I'd wanted to be in hospital for longer than that, but I would happily have trudged in every single day to still see her. But there's a comfort to that, even though it's still horrible and terrifying and awful seeing someone so ill. There was a comfort to knowing they're still there. And it's funny because, because she was out of the house then for the 5 weeks, when she was gone, you feel like, no, she's still there. No, she's not still there. She's gone. And it's, I remember becoming totally obsessed with, she had this lovely big scarf that she went into hospital with, and we collected her things. It wasn't there, and and when she died, I was with her when she died, and my dad had gone home, and we didn't know she was going to die. I mean, to be fair, the hospital were understaffed, and it wasn't an ideal situation. But I became obsessed with getting this scarf back, and they had put the scarf around her after she died. Like, we left the room, and I think they thought we just didn't want it back. And these fun things you become obsessed with. And I was like, there's a scarf and it's grey and pink. And and they went, oh, no, we have everything.
Yeah, but where?
And they were like, and there's a pair of Crocs. I was like, the Crocs, I'm not so full. I always made fun of my mum for wearing Crocs, because she was tall and she had really big feet and I have really small feet. And I was like, Mum, why do you wear the Crocs? Because they're comfortable in the house. Yeah. So I went back and the scarf was all packed up for me, and then there were the Crocs too. I was like, well, I better take the Crocs as well. But it's funny, the things that you become.
Have you found you've held on to random things? Like the Crocs, have you kept
the Crocs are still in it? Yeah, I have. And I feel for people who, if somebody dies and they have to sort out things very quickly, that must be very hard. And obviously we didn't have to do that. And my dad said to me after a year, he said, will you go through some of Mum's things? And we were different sizes, so my sister took a couple of her coats, but they'd all be too big for me. But I kept a couple of little things. But it's funny, going back to what you said about the big days that you're braced for. I never actually finished that. The big days are quite easy, but it's the little things, like when you're talking about the thing, like as soon as the supermarket Christmas catalogues come out, I would have rung and said, the M&S catalogues out. She'd go, it's way too early, but get me two. Get me two of them. And
it is, but those are the weird things.
Yeah, and they stop me in my tracks, and I feel a lump in my throat in a supermarket on... Yeah, probably November 1st, because it does start too early.
Yeah,
and then springtime, you go in and the spring jumpers. I would always pick her up a jumper, and she'd go, keep the receipt. I said, I'll keep the receipt. But it's the little things like that. Whereas Mother's Day signs everywhere, I go, she thought it was Hallmark nonsense anyway. But
that is a weird thing, though, and it is the thing. I think, especially the first couple of years, you build yourself up to, okay, it's Christmas. And I was told by somebody, I remember the first Christmas, and I was dreading the first Christmas, and everybody said to me, New Year's Eve. Watch out for New Year's Eve. And I hate New Year's Eve anyway.
So do
I love Christmas. Love Christmas Eve, whatever. New Year's Eve.
Oh, I'm the exact same.
Cannot stand it. I was delighted the weather was quite crap this year because
there's a whole podcast to be done
brilliant.
on New Year's Eve.
Oh, 100%.
Oh, gosh.
We'll come back to that. But apparently that I was warned by somebody that is the tricky one. So of course, got through Christmas. Christmas happened. I think I got upset days before, and then the actual Christmas I was fine. But the New Year's Eve did get me. But maybe because it was in my head.
Well, do you know what it got? I was warned of that too, and I was like, "You don't understand. I hate New Year's Eve, and I haven't."
But that's why I thought I'd be fine.
Yeah, I stopped going. I was 21. I went to my last New Year's Eve party.
Yeah,
never again.
Yeah.
And do you know what it was for me? It hit me that I was going into a new year without her, and that's what it was. And even just the using a different year and a different tense and things like that. Like I hate saying things like, "Oh, my mum was this." I go on the past tense would stop me in my tracks. And there was something about it was 2023 and it was starting the first year without her, and I had to start saying I lost my mum last year. And I just felt like I was moving further away in time from her, and that was what.
And I think that hits a lot of people because for me it was more the New Year started. Like in Martin's case, he died in the February, but I remember that February, it was sort of like the New Year started after his first anniversary. But then what I found really tricky was we'd already done both all the kids' birthdays, my birthday, his birthday, our wedding anniversary, all those things had been done already. So it's like you're moving further away and they're moving further away and it becomes this, well, a year ago. Yeah. And that's I found that really strange. Yeah. Which is why I think the second year is harder. Yeah. Than the first year.
And people warn you about that as well. And also the first year people are checking in.
Yeah.
And they
but
check in
blurry
all the
as
time.
well. You don't really.
Oh, you're numb.
Remember
you're totally numb. But then it's that people are checking in with you, and then they just stop checking in, and of course they do. And I would have done as well to people who lost people very tragically, and you check in, and then after a year, like, everyone has to get on with their lives, and I get that, but it's a weird thing. It's a very strange club.
It is
to join.
It is.
It's a shit club to join. There's no perks. Not even a membership card.
No, it is. And it's sort of, I remember really like almost one of the first sort of articles, whatever I did, it was sort of like, it's like a club you don't want to be in. And you're sort of there and there's loads of people around you, but you're just actually in your head, you're on your own. Yeah. You know,
it means a shit club. How does it even work? Where's the buffet? But then you start to realise that actually it's after a while it's comforting, and it's really funny. I remember meeting you and then feeling really selfish about being upset. I was like, no, I said, like, Venetia's lost her husband. It's totally different, but I still felt a comfort in seeing someone. And I saw the second I saw you, and I don't even know you that well. Like we were in school together, but you were 25 years ahead of me, obviously.
Yeah. Funny that, because your brother and I were in the same class in school.
I think, were you a year or two ahead of me?
I think
1 or 2 years. Anyway.
I think I was 2.
Yeah, because my brother left the school then, because he
was in primary school.
Yeah. Anyway,
I think
we're only a year or two apart. Let's be honest.
I'd say we're about 2.
But there's something, and I remember your eyes just totally softened when you saw me, and in that instant, you just know that somebody completely understands that you are feeling sad to your core. So in that way, it's not such a bad club. I think one thing that does come out, and like for anybody that hasn't gone through sort of losing somebody very close to them, I think they're so lucky. Yeah. They're so lucky, but you do gravitate towards people get the You really do.
And
it's hard sometimes to not feel resentful. And I remember I was trying, because I work on my own a lot, I can isolate myself very easily. And there was a weekly coffee thing I used to go to with sort of fairly new friends, and they're all really lovely. So I started going back to that about 8 weeks after Mum died. And the first one, they were all giving out about partners not doing something or work, and I was like, this seems so frivolous, and I ended up leaving
you do
early.
Get a bit annoyed.
And I was like, these people are so lucky if these are their problems. And then after a while you start to realise that life is relative, and if you're pissed off about something, you are entitled to be pissed off about that, and perspective is really important as well. So either if it's annoying you too much, then just don't go till you're ready. But I
was going to say to you, like, if moving forward, because I hate this moving on, but everyone goes, oh, it's time to move on, or do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
As you try and move forward, if you could give somebody advice or some sort of message of hope, what would that be?
Oh, I've absolutely no hope. Don't you? Just know. Do you know, it's actually really hard. And the platitudes I would have trotted out years ago, I don't use anymore. I remember one of the first times I was in my 20s, and the guy I worked with had lost his grandmother, and his own father was in his late 60s, the grandma's in her 90s, and his father was like 68. I remember saying to him, God, but God, your mum had a really good innings, didn't she? And the man looked at me and he said, you know what, Maia? He said, I don't know a world without her. And it really, and I was 24 or 5 at the time, and it stayed with me, because I thought, this man shouldn't even be sad. He's 68 and still has his mum. But actually he said, I don't know a world without her. Yeah. And I found that really, really sad. So I think I don't do things like, time's a great healer. I don't like those.
Kids are very resilient.
They are very resilient. There was
particular favourite.
Yeah, or the other one. Yeah,
but you're young.
Yeah. Your mum actually lent me €20. I'm not giving that €20 back. But I you know what? All I would ever say is just, take one day at a time. Don't isolate yourself. I did a bit too much of that. And sometimes you feel like then you've done it too much to ever kind of reach out to people. And also there are some people who just won't be there for you, and it's very, very hurtful. And it's okay if you decide to...
But people grieve differently. That is the one thing I learned. That there were a few people that... It's actually... Isn't it funny the way some people act the way you don't expect them to?
Yeah.
Like some people are massively there and you mightn't have expected them to be. And the people that you really thought would, some of them just can't handle it.
I know, yeah.
And I think you've got to accept that. That took me a while to accept that everyone grieves sort of differently.
They do, but it can be very, very upsetting if the people who you thought you could rely on are not there for you. But what I would say is, rather than I spent too much time dwelling on, there were a couple of people who I just felt had let me down quite badly, and that was almost making me more upset again. But then I found new people who just didn't let me down, and we were there for each other. So I think find people who you're comfortable talking to, take one day at a time, and it's, and also, what I always say to people is, be kind to yourself. I was like, I don't know what that means. What does that mean? But do even things like just making sure you eat well, making sure you try and sleep. They're the things that were important to me. But finding comfort in more unusual places or people you hadn't previously thought of was a great help to me, and it didn't even have to be like, there was one friend and I just kept leaving her voice notes, and I didn't want her to call me back. She leaves voice notes back for me, and the voice notes were really helpful to me, because I didn't really want to speak to anybody, if that makes sense. But none of that's very helpful advice at all.
No, but I think it is, because I think it's sort of, I think we all have expectations.
Yeah.
And those expectations mightn't always come to fruition. So that's another thing, and that's another sort of, I suppose, challenge. Yeah. When you're also facing the challenge of grieving that you might know before. Yeah. Then there's the challenge of how people are different.
And I think also,
people are different.
I don't want to be the anti-gratitude person, but going back to what I said before, I think gratitude and positivity is really important, but I think it's also really important to say to yourself, things are actually really bad now, but they will slowly get a little bit better. Or even just if tomorrow is less shit than today, that's a good thing. I think sometimes it's really important, because some people, they can't find any good stuff right now. So it's important to say you will in time, but sometimes sit with the bad stuff and accept that it's okay. Like, it's a very difficult time, and difficult times do not always yield positivity.
No, but it does sometimes. Yeah. Well, it always does get that little bit. Yeah. That little bit.
And there's funny things. Like I remember, because Tom was only 6.5, and he was very upset, but in a very different way to me. Kids are very resilient.
Kids are very resilient.
But I said to him, I know all the stuff that I was never going to do, the white feathers and the rainbows. And I said, look, every time we see a white feather, that's Nana sending a little sign. He went, oh, that's amazing. I thought, why am I telling him this stuff? And the next day I was walking home, and she was only gone a couple of weeks, and this huge white feather floated down and literally touched off my nose, and I was like, oh my God. And I turned a corner, and a seagull had been hit by a van. And I burst out laughing. And I talk about gratitude, and I was like, my mum would have absolutely loved that. Yeah. And I was like, oh God, I've got seagull guts on my nose now. And it stopped me in my tracks for all the right reasons. And I went home chuckling away going, that is actually hilarious. And my mum would have gone, well, seriously right with your silly feather nonsense. And I still do the feathers and the robins and the rainbows because like lighting candles, it means you're taking a second to think about somebody.
Yeah.
So, I don't believe that my mum was sending robins from heaven.
But seagulls, maybe.
But maybe she didn't like them, so. Oh, it was kind of
that
flapping in the road as well. And anyway.
Anyway, on that note, Maia, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode. You can find us on SoundCloud and wherever you get your podcasts every Tuesday. You can join our online community on Facebook, The Grief Pod, or on Insta @GriefPod Series.